Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We'll be learning today Mitzvah Hashem Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Aleph. We actually pick up today on Lamed Amid Beis with a brand new Siman Tavkuf Nun Daled. Of course, we're continuing to learn Hilchos Tisha B'Av. And Siman Tavkuf Nun Daled Dvarim Ha'asurim B'Tisha B'Av. Things that are prohibited on Tisha B'Av. Ubai Chav Beis Seifim. And here in this siman we have 22 seifim. Says the Mechaber in Sif Aleph. Tisha B'Av, on Tisha B'Av, Asur B'Rechitza, you're not allowed to do any kind of washing. V'Sicha, you're not allowed to anoint yourself with anything. You can't smear anything on your skin. V'Ne'ilas HaSandal, you're not allowed to wear a leather shoe. V'Tash B'Shamita, you're not allowed to engage in marital relations. V'Asur Likrais B'Torah Nevi'im U'Ksuvim, you're not allowed to learn Torah, so you're not allowed to read Torah, you're not allowed to read Chumash, Nevi'im, you can't learn Navi, Uksuvim, you're not allowed to learn any of the Ksuvim, so you can't be learning Megillas Esther or Kehelis. If it's during the summer, maybe you want to prepare for Sukkot, you can't learn Kehelis. V'lishnais Mishnah, you're not allowed to learn Mishnayos. Uva Medrash, you're not allowed to learn Midrashim. Uva Gemara, you can't learn Gemara. B'halachais, Uva Agadais, you can't learn halacha, you can't learn divrei agadita. Mishum shenemar b'kudei Hashem yishar mesamchei lev. And the reason for this last prohibition, the reason why you're not allowed to engage in Torah learning, is because David HaMelech tells us b'kudei Hashem yisharim mesamchei lev. The precepts, the commandments of Hashem, the Torah Hakadoshah, are straight and they make the heart rejoice. And rejoicing, obviously, is not appropriate for Tisha B'Av. And therefore it says the Mechaber v'tinokel shabeis rabban b'telim boy. The children, the young children who generally go to yeshiva, they learn with the Rebbe, they're not allowed to learn either. The tinokel shabeis rabban a bottle, they don't learn Torah. Aval, however, kari hu be'iyuv, you are allowed to learn Sefer Iyuv. Iyuv is very sad. It speaks about all the troubles and trials and travails and tribulations that occurred to Iyuv. Ubadvarim harayim shebiyirmiyah. You're also allowed to learn Sefer Yirmiyah, the parts of Sefer Yirmiyah, with the Dvarim harayim, the discussions of Puranas, of the punishments that were coming to Klal Yisrael, the foretelling of the Churban. V'im yesh b'neim psukei nechama. However, you have in Yirmiyah interspersed between all of the Tarchacha, all of the Musar that Yirmiyah gave to Klal Yisrael, and the prophecies of the impending Churban, you have psukim of nechama, you have psukim of consolation as well. Tzarech ledalgam, if you're learning Yirmiyah, those psukim you must skip. Okay, now let's go back to Lamed Amid Beis. Let's go to the Mishnah Berurah Katan Aleph. Asur B'Rechitza. So the Mechaber started off by telling us that on Tisha B'Av, we know we have the Chamisha Inuyim. There are 5 ways that we pain our bodies, so to speak. There are 5 distinct prohibitions. There's the Isser of Achilu Shtia, the fast, obviously. There's Rechitza, washing, bathing, Sicha, anointing, Nilas HaSandal, wearing shoes, and Tashbish Shamita. And then the Mechaber added on that you're not allowed to learn Torah. Here in Ois Katan Aleph, the Chavetz Chaim says, Asur B'Rechitza v'asur likreis Torah. Says the Chavetz Chaim, you should realize v'asur b'chalelu advarim kol hayom. These things are forbidden for the entire day of Tisha B'Av. Va'afilu bein hashmashos, they become asur starting with shkia, with sundown of Tisha B'Av night. And that the period between shkia and tzesak echavim is what we call bein hashmashos, twilight. But all of these things are asur beginning with shkia, Tisha B'Av night. So they're even asur bein hashmashos. Ad tzesak echavim, until after Tzesak Echavim on Matzoi Tisha B'Av. So all of these things are prohibited the entire day of Tisha B'Av, and they're prohibited during the Ben Hashmashos period, both going into Tisha B'Av and Matzoi Tisha B'Av coming out of Tisha B'Av. Ve'en moyel lozeh mashi yispal ma'ariv mikaydim. Somebody will say, well, I davened ma'ariv already on Matzoi Tisha B'Av. He davened ma'ariv early. So he davened ma'ariv right after Shkia. And now he wants to go ahead, he wants to eat, he wants to take a shower, or he just wants to sit down and learn Daf Yomi. No, that doesn't help. You have to wait until after Tzesak Echavim. However, those people who go amongst the non-Jews Va'oiskim b'masa umata nacha chatzos, and after chatzos on Tisha B'Av they engage in business activity. Sometimes, in certain cases, there is a heter for that. Oisan mutarin linoil. We're going to see later that people who have to spend a lot of time amongst non-Jews, or people who are engaged in business after chatzos on Tisha B'Av, when it's permissible, so those people have a heter to wear shoes. And the reason that's brought down, it says here, the reason for this heter is that if somebody is forced by the nature of his job or what have you to spend a lot of time on Tisha B'Av after chatzos by the Goyim, so he's going to be walking in his place of business in Crocs. People are going to look at him like he's funny. They're going to make fun of him. This is strange. What are you doing in a business setting wearing Crocs? So he has a heter to wear shoes. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Umehem lamdu kulam lahakel, and from the existence of this heter, since there are those people who have a heter after chatzos Tisha B'Av by day to wear shoes, people saw that, and they went ahead and they extended that heter, and they said that, after chatzos on Tisha B'Av, maybe all of the inuyim become mutter. Maybe you're allowed to do sicha. Maybe you're allowed to wear shoes. So maybe you're also allowed to wash. Maybe you're also allowed to anoint yourself. And that's why the Chavetz Chaim is being very careful to tell you all of these things are usher from Shkia Tisha B'Av night until after Tzedek Chavim on Motzei Tisha B'Av. There is no heter to be lenient on any of these things after Chatzos Tisha B'Av by day. The one kula that we do find is that we have a minhag that we don't sit on a high chair on Tisha B'Av. We sit on the ground or on a very low chair, like an oval, on Tisha B'Av. But that is more kal after Chatzos Tisha B'Av by day. You're allowed to sit on a regular chair after Tisha B'Av by day, but that's because that's the concept that we don't sit on a regular chair on Tisha B'Av. That's not Medina Deshas. That's not brought down in the Gemara. The other Chamisha Inuyim and not to learn Torah are all brought down in the Gemara. Since those are brought down in the Gemara, those apply for the entire day of Tisha B'Av. Sitting on a chair is only a minhag. It's not Medina Deshas. So that we're makel after Chatzos, and you can sit on a regular chair after Chatzos. So says the Chavetz Chaim, Mehem lamdu kulam lahakel v'yesh limchos biyadam. If we see anybody that's being makel with any of the other isurim of Tisha B'Av after Chatzos Tisha B'Av by day, we should object to what they're doing. Okay, the Mechaber said that you're allowed to learn the Dvarim Hara'im Shebiyirmiyah. You're allowed to learn those parts of Yirmiyah that talk about Peronus, that talk about evil tidings and evil things that either did befall Klal Yisrael or would befall Klal Yisrael. Says the Chavetz Chaim in Ois Katan Beis, Verois Akum, bad tidings, bad news for non-Jews that you find in Yirmiyah, also Likros. Those you're not allowed to learn. So in other words, when the Mechaber says you're allowed to learn Dvarim Haroim, it means Dvarim Haroim for Klal Yisrael, not Dvarim Haroim for non-Jews. Dvarim Haroim for non-Jews, you're not allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av either. That's not bad news for us. Ve'emati noikos, this is very interesting. If you notice, the Mechaber said on the bottom line here, V'tinoikos shel beis rabban betelim boy. The children who usually learn in yeshiva, they are bottle on Tisha B'Av. Okay, now says the Mishnah Berurah, Ve'emati noikos, with children, aser lilmoid af dvarim haroim. There's a heter for you to sit down and learn Yirmiyah and learn the parts of Yirmiyah that speak about Peronus, that speak about evil tidings. That you're allowed to learn. Are you allowed to learn that with the Tinoiker Shel Beis Rabban? Says the Mishnah Berurah over here in this opinion, no. V'matinoiker is also lilmain af dvarim haroim. You're not even allowed to learn dvarim haroim together with the Tinoikos. Now this is brought down, if you take a look in the Sharetzion Katan Vav, he brings this down from the Magen Avram. And if you look at the Magen Avram seems to give two reasons why you're not allowed to learn even the Dvarim Haroim with the Tinoikel Shel Beis Rabban. One is, think about it this way. Why are you allowed to learn Dvarim Haroim? You're not allowed to learn Torah because B'kudei Hashem Yishar B'samchei Leiv. Learning Torah is something that causes your heart to rejoice. That's not appropriate for Tisha B'Av. But you, an adult, you're allowed to learn Dvarim Haroim because Devarim Haroyim, you understand what it is that you're learning. You understand that you're learning about something which discusses Piranus. It discusses punishments for Klal Yisrael, or evil tidings for Klal Yisrael. So that's not going to be Mesameach you. So you're allowed to learn that on Tisha B'Av. But with Tinokel Shel Beis Rabban, that's not necessarily true. They don't have the depth of understanding to understand that they're learning Devarim Haroyim, and therefore they shouldn't have simcha from it. They have simcha because they're learning Torah. Or like the words of the Magen Avram, if you look at the Magen Avram, he says the ikar simcha of children when they learn is that sheyodim likros. They see that they know how to read and they know how to learn. It's just the learning that gives them simcha. But they don't have the depth of understanding to realize that they're learning Devarim Haroyim, so that should dampen their simcha. It dampens the simcha of an adult. It doesn't dampen the simcha of children. So that's one reason why the Magen Avram says you can't learn even the Devarim Haroyim with Tinokel Shel Beis Rabban. Then the Magen Avram says, and even if you'll tell me that the child does understand, he's a smarter kid, he's a more mature kid, and he understands the evil portent of what he's learning, and therefore you'll say maybe that will dampen his simcha, the Magen Avram says you're still not allowed to learn it with him, because the lashon of the Magen Avram is very interesting. He says, Aser lilmoid klal im acherim. The Magen Avram seems to be saying really another chiddush, which is that on Tisha B'Av, even the things that you are allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av, you don't learn with a chavrusa. You don't get together and learn with other people. Could be that learning with another person, I saw some Akhronim say that there's a pirsum. It kind of like publicizes. Somehow it's not appropriate to see a full base medrash of everybody learning on Tisha B'Av, learning with chavrusas. That itself is already a simcha. But I think there's also, when you learn with somebody else, so right away what's the lashon of Chazal? Pilpul chaverim. When you have pilpul chaverim, so right away somebody comes up with a chiddush. Whenever you're learning with somebody else, a question comes up, so there's a question and an answer. You learn together with somebody else, you learn pshat one way, you learn pshat another way. Right away now you're getting into a discussion. That's all mesanchei leiv. So the Magen Avram over here says you can't learn with Tinokel Shel Beis Rabban simply because you don't learn with another person. So it seems from that Magen Avram that he wouldn't want you to learn with a chavrusa either. But in any case, those are two reasons that the Magen Avram says that you can't learn with the Tinokel Shel Beis Rabban, even Devarim Haroyim. Now, before we talk about this further, let's just look back in the words of the Mishnah Berurah. You'll tell me, okay, so you can't learn even Devarim Haroyim with the Tinokel Shel Beis Rabban. So is there anything that you can learn with the Tinokel Shel Beis Rabban? Continues the Mishnah Berurah and he says, Rak mutter lilmoid lo hachurban. But you are allowed to learn the stories and the history of the Churban. That you are allowed to learn with the Tinokel Shel Beis Rabban. The Eina Elo Sipur Dvarim. Because that's not Limud HaTorah. That's history. You're telling them stories. Or Mishaber Leiv HaTinoik. And you tell them the terrible, sad stories, the terrible things that happened to Klal Yisrael. That makes them sad. Okay, this is the opinion of the Magen Avram. Now, in the Sharetzion Ois Cotton Vav, not going to read the whole thing inside, but he points out that one of the reasons that the Magen Avram says this is because look at the lashon of the Mechaber. The lashon of the Mechaber is v'tinokel shel beis Rabban b'telim boy. The yeshivas, the tinokel shel beis Rabban, are shut. They're bottled. They're shut down. It doesn't say that the tinokel shel beis Rabban don't learn Torah on Tisha B'Av, but they can learn Dvar Ma'utarim. It says no, they're b'telim. So like the Sharetzion says, the lashon of Gemara, the Mechaber is taking this from the lashon of the Gemara, and the lashon of the Gemara is b'telim boy, that they're bottled. Mashma, the implication is b'chol gavni, they're completely shut down, locked down. So on Tisha B'Av, the Tinokel Shel Beis Rabban are shut down. They don't have the option of learning something else. That's the opinion of the Magen Avram. Now we go to the Mishnah Berurah, Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph. The Mishnah Berurah continues, and he says, however, V'yesh me'achronim, there are those achronim, and in the Sharetzion he brings down the Taz, Shesayvrin who hold, the mutter lilmaid imatinaik b'dvarim haroyim, that you are allowed to learn the dvarim haroyim with children. The Khan, and over here when the Mechaber says v'tinokel shel beis Rabban b'telim boy, loy asar el halimud shektanim loydim b'seidu shalahem. What he means when he says Tinoikel Shabeis Rabban B'Telim Bay, he means that the Tinoikel Shabeis Rabban have their normal Sidrei Halimud. The normal Sidrei Halimud are shut down on Tisha B'Av. The Hainu Chumash and Gemara, the normal Chumash and Gemara that the Tinoikel Shabeis Rabban learn, that is shut down on Tisha B'Av. But it doesn't mean that they can't learn anything. They can learn something. They can learn the Dvar Maroim. That's the opinion of the Taz. Okay, now we go to the top line of Lamed Aleph with Sif Beis. Says the Mechaber, Umuter Lilmaid Medrash Eicha. You're allowed to learn the Midrashim of Eicha. Certainly you're allowed to learn Eicha. But not only are you allowed to learn Eicha, you're allowed to learn the Medrash of Eicha. Uperek Elu Megalchin. You're also allowed to learn Perek Elu Megalchin in Moed Katan, because that discusses Hilchas Avelus. V'chein Lilmaid Pirish Eicha. And like I said, certainly you're allowed to learn Eicha, or Pirish Iyuv, and you're allowed to learn Iyuv. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Gimel, Eicha, you're allowed to learn Eicha. V'chein Agodas HaChurban B'Perek HaNizaken, you're allowed to learn in Mesechtes Gittin and Perek HaNizaken, you're allowed to learn the Gemaras that discuss what transpired at the time of the Churban. U'B'Perek Chelik, and in Mesechtes Sanhedrin and Perek Chelik, you could learn the Gemaras that speak about the Churban. V'Likrais B'Churban HaNizkar B'Yosifun, and you could also read the history of the Churban as it is recorded in Josephus. Mutter, that's also mutter. Ais Katan Dalid, the Mechaber said you're allowed to learn Elu Megalchin. Aval Gav Diyesh by Kama Dine Menuda Umuchram. In Perek Elu Megalchin, we don't only discuss Hilchas Avelus, we also discuss the halachas of one who was put into Cherem by Bezdin. Mikal Moker Mutter Lilmoid. Still, you're allowed to learn that. Avalisa Velitein Bahalacha Bevadai Oser. What does it mean that you're allowed to learn Elu Megalchin and learn Hilchas Avelus and Elu Megalchin? It doesn't mean that you're allowed to sit down and write a chabura on the intricacies of Halacha Lamaisa of Hilchas Avelus. You're not allowed to be Lisa Velitein Bahalacha. That you're not allowed to do. You're allowed to simply learn the Gemaras. Okay, and this is what the Taz writes. Even the things that you are allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av, it means that you're allowed to learn Pashut Pshat in the Gemara. But you're not allowed to be mefalpel, you're not allowed to delve into, you're not allowed to learn it be'iyun and write a chabura. Says the Chavetz Chaim, even just in your mind, to work out, you'll say, I'm learning Elu Megalchin, so I have a shvera Gemara and a shvera Tosfos. And I want to go and I want to work through the sugya, even if I'm not doing verbally, even if I'm only doing it in my mind. That says, the Chavetz Chaim says that's also. Because if you have a shvera Tosfos, and you sit working out the shvera Tosfos in your mind, and you reach pshat and Tosfos, you're going to have a gavaldik simcha. So that simcha is inappropriate for Tisha B'Av. That's simcha satira. That's not a simcha that's appropriate for Tisha B'Av. I always say, why is it that when you work out a shverkeit, you work out a shver gemara, you work out a shver Tosfos, you have a gavaldik simcha? Anybody who ever had this, you're stuck on a Tosfos, you can't figure out what Tosfos is teretz is, and you go back and forth and you try to work it out. Suddenly it hits you. What Tosfos is saying is mamish azas simcha, that you want to get up and you want to dance. What is it that generates that tremendous simcha? So I always felt that the answer to that question is, you have to understand why you suddenly figured out pshat. What do I mean? Sometimes you're stuck on a Tosfos. So what do? You read the Tosfos and you're stuck. So you turn to the back, you look at the Marsha. Maybe the Marsha asks your kasha and gives an answer. You look at the Marsha doesn't say anything. You look at the Maram doesn't say anything. You ask your Chaver. Your Chaver doesn't know. You look around the Bispendish. There's nobody else who's learning this. There's nobody else who you can ask. So what do? So you look at the Tosfos and you read it again. You still don't understand it. So you read it again. You still don't understand it. So you read it again. Then you say to yourself, maybe I'm missing something in the sugya. So you read the Gemara again. You read the Rashi again. You read the Tosfos again. At a certain point, sometimes you reach a point where all you're doing is you're reading it again, and you're reading it again, and you're reading it again, and you're reading it again. And then suddenly, after a half hour of sweating over the Tosfos, and reading it again, and reading it again, and reading it again, and breaking your head and trying to figure this out, suddenly you say, whoa, wait a second. Hold it. I get what Taisus is saying. Why didn't I see that a half hour ago? I chop what Taisus is saying. What changed between then and a minute before? What made you just chop it now when you didn't chop it 2 minutes ago, 5 minutes ago, half hour ago? All you did was read it again another 50 times. All you did was furrow your brow and think. But you didn't see anything new. You didn't garner any fresh information. So what made you just figure out pshat? What just happened? The answer is that that's a matnas elikim. That's a gift from Hashem. You have to put in the harvanya. You have to put in the work. But when you sit over the Torah HaKdosha and you furrow your brow and you work and you harva and you try to figure it out, ultimately the Rebbeinu Shalom gives you the answer. But that's a gift from him. You just got a gift from the Rebbeinu Shalom. When you get a gift from the Rebbeinu Shalom, that causes a tremendous amount of simcha. That's something that makes you want to jump up and dance. And that, says the Chavetz Chaim, is inappropriate to Tisha B'Av. Now we go weiter in Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Hay. Va'aser lahayrois hayra. You're not allowed to paskin a shayla on Tisha B'Av. Im lo l'chayla hatzarach achshav. Unless it's a shayla that pertains to Tisha B'Av and they need the answer now. For example, if you're a Pesach and they come to ask you a shayla about a chayla, about an ill individual, whether he's allowed to eat or he's mechuyev to eat or he shouldn't eat, so that's something they need a psak halacha right now. So then you're allowed to paskin. But somebody wants to come and ask a shayla that doesn't pertain to Tisha B'Av, you're not allowed to paskin shaylas on Tisha B'Av. Fa'aser ladun dinei mamanis. We don't adjudicate cases that have to do with finance, with monetary law. The din hainu Torah, because judging based on the halachas of the Torah HaKdosha, that's Torah. That's actually learning Torah. You're taking the limud Torah and you're acting on it. You're applying it. Miu, however, if the court case can't wait until tomorrow, if the two litigants are leaving, so then you have no choice, you have to do it now on Tisha B'Av. After the shari, it could be that would be mutter, says the Chavetz Chaim, because that would be something that the rabbim needs you to do it. And we'll see later that there are heterim for that. Okay, says the Mechaber in Siv Gimel. Oh, whoops, I goofed. I was doing Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Dalit earlier, and then I accidentally skipped into Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Hay. So let me go back into Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Dalit. I'm just going to read it from the beginning. Even though in Perek Elul Megalchin and Moed Cotton, besides Hilchas Avelus, you also have the halachas that pertain to somebody who's in Cherem. Nevertheless, you're allowed to learn it. But to be mefalpel in halacha, you're not allowed to do. Even things that you're allowed to learn, even to think through something complicated is aser, because you can have a tremendous simcha when you resolve the problem. Okay, that was Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Daled. Now we go to the Mechaber on the second line in Siv Gimel. Yesh mi she'oser lilmaid al yedei hirhur. There are those, and in the Berurah, this is brought down from the Agur, that say that you're not allowed to learn Torah even just in thought. Forget about opening up a sefer and sitting and learning and saying the words. You're not allowed to think in Torah. You're not allowed to think through a taisus on Tisha B'Av. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting hay al yidei hearer. After hearer lav kedibur dami, even though we paskin that hearer thought is not like speech, so maybe you would think that hearer in Torah is mutter. Shani hacha over here on Tisha B'Av it's different. The ikar taima mishum simcha. Because why is it also to learn Torah on Tisha B'Av? Because so the whole Isser is because of Simcha. Simcha. And by thinking through a Shiur Taisus, there's just as much Simcha as if you would say the words. So it's also because of Simcha. Or my high time, and for the same reason, also Lilmaid Eze Drush, Kushya, Terutz, Afilu Bidvar Maroim. For this reason, don't think that you're allowed to learn Yirmiyah and come up with a beautiful drasha based on one of the Devarim Harayim Nevuos of Yirmiyah. Sometimes you could have a very nice drasha. You could learn Yirmiyah, you could see what the Navi said, and it could be Dvarim Aroyim, it could be speaking about Paranos, but you could make a nice drasha out of it. No, you're not allowed to do that on Tisha B'Av. Because that's a simcha for you. Now the rest of this Mishnah Berurah we already read. Also Lahayros we read already. Now we go to the Mechaber and Sivdalad. On Tisha B'Av, umutar likrais kol seder hayoim. You're allowed, when you daven, you're allowed to read as part of the davening the Seder Hayoim. What is the Seder Hayoim? So we're going to see in the Mishnah Berurah, the Mishnah Berurah is going to say that the Seder Hayoim, let's learn it right now. Mishnah Berurah is Katan Vav. Umutar likrais kol seder hayoim. You're allowed to read and recite the entire Seder Hayoim. Dahainu kriyishma uberchiseha. You're allowed to say kriyishma. Kriyishma is Torah. It comes straight out of the Chumash, but you're allowed to say kriyishma on Tisha B'Av. V'chol masha shayich leberkas hatfilah. And anything that you have to say as part of the brachos of davening, you're allowed to say psukkah de zimra, even though that's tehillim. It's ksuvim. You're allowed to daven psukkah de zimra. You're allowed to say berachas kriyishma. You're allowed to say kriyishma. Continues the Mechaber in Ois Katan Daled. You're allowed to say umutar likrais kol seder hayoim uparshas hakarbonos, which means the carbon tamid. You're allowed to say the parsha of the carbon tamid. Or Mishnas Ezehu Mekayman. You could say Ezehu Mekayman, which is actually it's a parak of Mishnayos from Masechtas Zvachim. Or Medrash Rabbi Yishmael, and you're allowed to say the Brisa Rabbi Yishmael Omer. Even though these things are Torah, you're allowed to recite them on Tisha B'Av. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Zayin. Or Parshas HaKarbonos of Mishnas Ezehu Mekayman. The Loigara calls them Imashikarim B'Torah or Maftirin B'Navi. We're going to see that you're allowed to go ahead and you're allowed to lane on Tisha B'Av. You're allowed to lane Kisolid by Shachris, which is from Parshas V'Eschanan. You're allowed to lane by Chal Moshe by Mincha, which is from Parshas Kisisa, which is Chumash. You're allowed to lane the Haftarahs. So the same way you're allowed to do that, you're also allowed to daven. You're allowed to say Psukkah de Zimri. You're allowed to say Kriyishma. You're allowed to say Berachas Kriyishma. V'akol neishu seder hayoim. And the reason for all of this is because this is not, you're not saying this and reciting this as limud haTorah. It's the Seder Hayoim. It's just part of davening. You're allowed to daven. V'nayhagid loimer tehillim v'shir hayichud b'mincha. The Chavetz Chaim says that they had the minute to say tehillim, people who say tehillim every day, and to say the yoim, the shir hayichud by mincha. Avagav the aser b'Talmud Torah kol hayoim. Even though the iser of Talmud Torah applies the whole day, so if they're aser, if you're not allowed to say the yoim by shachris because of Talmud Torah, then you shouldn't be allowed to say the yoim by mincha either. Still, tzarech loimer, you have to say the svira lo nkevichu derech bakasha shari. Really, again, this is a recitation as part of davening. It's not limud. It's derech bakasha. Ubepoizna, and the Chavetz Chaim says in Posen, nehagin loimer lamacharasai shal emesh v'shal hayoim. The minhag was that on the day after Tisha B'Av, they would say the yom of Tisha B'Av and the yom of the day after Tisha B'Av, and the Chavetz Chaim says v'chein nachay. Or ma'amadais bevadai loimer, people of the minhag to say ma'amadais should not say them on Tisha B'Av. V'ayel kamansim v'tavkuf d'ntesiv daled. De'ein loimer pita makteirish she'edim miseder hayoim. You don't say pita makteirish atzara v'tziparin akalbana v'alavayna. The parsha of the Ketores, we don't in Bayin Kalakenu. We don't say that because that's not considered to be Seder Hayoim because not everybody has the minute to say it. Nusach Ashkenaz doesn't say it. The Choshkein Shein Loimer Seder HaKarbonos HaKosov B'Seif Siv and Aleph Siv Tes, and certainly we shouldn't say the parsha of the Kiyar and the parsha of Trumas Hadeshen. These things we shouldn't say. Umasha Kosov Shulchan Aruch Hu Parshas Karbonos. When the Mechaber says that you could say Karbonos, Hainu Parshas HaTamid, he's speaking specifically about the parsha of the carbon tamid. Now we continue in the Mechaber, continuing Sif Daled, with the words of the Rabbah. Haga, it's 4 lines down. Haga, umutar lachzar haparsha b'Tisha B'Av. This does not mean that you could be Marvis Sedra. What this means is if you're the Balkara and you want to go over the parsha of Kisei Ludbanim of Devanim that has to be laned by Shachris, you want to go over the laning of Vayichal Moshe that has to be laid by Mincha, you're allowed to review the Kriya to prepare the Kriya Satorah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, and with the Lachzar Parsha B'Tisha B'Av, Hainu Chazan HaKoirei. This is a reference to the Baal Koirei. Mutter Loi, it's permissible for him, Lachzar Parsha, to review the laning, Kaidim Sheyikra, before he lanes. V'hainu Afilu B'Mincha. And this applies even to the laning of Vayichal Moshe. the ilu b'shacharis, it's not such a chiddush to tell me that you're allowed to review the shacharis Tisha B'Av laning on Tisha B'Av, because that's a parsha of Tadchacha. The parsha of Kisei L'banim Uvnei Banim and Aishamtem Ba'aretz is a parsha of Tadchacha. It's Moshe Rabbeinu giving Musar to Klal Yisrael. So that's Divrei Techacha. Divrei Techacha you're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. Parsha Kisei L'pshita, the Be'ena Ma'urihi. Oh, that's not what the Mishnah Berurah says. The Mishnah Berurah doesn't say that it's Tadchacha. The Mishnah Berurah says it's Me'ein HaMa'urah. It's Paranus. It's Mamish. What is the parsha of Kisei L'banim about? It's the Rebbeinu Shalom warning Klal Yisrael about impending Churban. So that's mamish appropriate for Tisha B'Av. But the chiddush over here is that even the mincha laning of Vayichal Moshe, you're also allowed to review on Tisha B'Av. Okay, now we go to the Mechaber in Sif Hey. Says the Mechaber, Ubrais umenikais. Ubrais umenikais, expectant women and nursing mothers, misanois b'Tisha B'Av, they fast on Tisha B'Av, kederech shebisanois ubashlimais b'Yom Kippur, the same way they have to fast and complete the tainus on Yom Kippur. Avo b'shloishet tzomais acherim, but on the other three fasts, namely Asar B'Tevis and Shiva Asar B'Tamas and Tzom Gedalia, P'turim milehesanois, the Mechaber says they are exempt from fasting. V'aval pikein, nevertheless, roi, it is appropriate, shaloi techalna lehisanig b'maikal of a Mishnah, they shouldn't eat a beautiful meal to enjoy eating and drinking. Ella k'dei kiyam avlad, they should eat and drink what they have to eat in order to sustain either their unborn child or their newborn child that has to nurse. V'ayin le'el sim tavkuf non sif aleph, where the Mechaber said this halacha over there. He said that by the other three tanesim, ikar adin, expectant women, nursing mothers, don't have a chiyuv to fast. Okay, you know what? I was going to go weiter, but I don't think so. I think we're going to stop over here, and the reason is because Sif Vav starts to discuss the halachas of ill individuals on Tisha B'Av and whether they have to fast or not. And I don't want to start Sif Vav and do the opinion of the Mechaber and then stop before we get to the Ramah. I'd rather do it all in one shot. So B'yirtzeh Hashem will pick up on Sunday with Sif Vav on the bottom line of Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph. Thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. The discussion of Liman HaTorah should be megan on Gans Klal Yisrael. The Ran should say Yeshua Rufus and Parnasa to all those in need, and we should be zeicher to see the Bias Girl Tzedek B'Meher V'Yameinu, and these halachas of Tisha B'Av should never again be negeya. Be well.